On today's show, the Cavs enter a week with a losing streak for the first time all season. We'll talk about their matchups with the Detroit Pistons, Miami Heat, and Atlanta Hawks on this whip-around edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Cade Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Friends don't let friends go without Locked On Cavs. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Also, need to let you know that Locked On Cavs now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On Cavs Daily Newsletter, your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That is LockedOnDaily.com. The Cleveland Cavaliers have lost 3 straight games entering this week. They've got games against the Detroit Pistons tonight, if you're watching or listening to this on Monday, and then Miami on Wednesday, and at home, second night of a back-to-back on Thursday against the Atlanta Hawks. That Atlanta game, of course, has been upgraded to a nationally televised game that will be featured on TNT. So that will be one a lot of eyes will be on, and we'll see if the Cavs are playing better basketball by the time that arrives. But we talked with Ku Khahil of Locked On Pistons, does a great job up there, talking about old friend JB Bickerstaff, what Cade Cunningham has been up to as he looks to maybe notch his first All-Star appearance later on this week. We talked with Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat, all things Jimmy Butler, what's going on with the Heat, and of course, wrap this show up with Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks. So without anything else from me, here's my conversation with Ku Khahil. And now we head over to our friends in Detroit. Ku Khahil does a great job covering the Pistons at Locked On Pistons. Check out that podcast if you want to learn more about what JB Bickerstaff and his new team are up to. But they've won 6 out of their last 10 games. Cade Cunningham, somebody who, at least in my estimation, certainly looks like he should be on the Eastern Conference All-Star team. Ku, what's been going on with the Pistons lately, man?
Man, they've been playing. First of all, thank you for having me. And second of all, they've been playing I don't want to say great basketball because that would make it seem like they're like the top of the East, but they are playing a level of basketball that I don't think very many people thought they had this year, especially after Jane Ivey goes down. Like Jane Ivey goes down January 1st, and they're 9-4 this month. This is their first winning month in 37 months. So like it's been 37 months. First time they've had.
Is that now? I have to stop you. Is that 37 in season months, or like you counting? Like
no, 37 in
May, June, month. July. Oh my goodness, that is a wild stat. That's insane.
Since having an over 500 record.
Oh my goodness, that's an incredible stat.
But they're playing really good. So I mean, they're still 6th in the East. Still coming off this tough loss to Orlando. But they're playing really well, and Cade's looking like he's taking another leap. So the vibe in Detroit's really good right now.
I wanted to ask you about Cade because, he's played incredible basketball, I think, for the majority of this season. Is he a perfect basketball player? No. And I don't think that he is, even to the point that he will be. Like, I don't think he's done improving as a basketball player, but I think at this point, he should be somebody that's considered an all-star. And I don't think this is some flash in the pan all-star appearance where he's going to be a one-time all-star and it's going to look weird when you look at his basketball reference. I expect him to be sort of a perennial all-star type of player. But what has really stood out to you about his game this year in terms of what is different about Cade Cunningham from last season to what he has turned into this season?
Well, there's a few areas that he's really improved at, and like areas that he was already like good at, but that he's become great at. Like this year he's been just an otherworldly playmaker for the Pistons. I know he's turning the ball over a lot, but his ability to make reads within the half court, to anticipate what the defense is doing, to pick apart a defense, know what they're doing, know what they want him to do. He's been tremendous at that. The shooting around him has really helped him. A ton, give him spacing, which is something Pistons fans have asked for years. But with Malik Beasley, a Tobias Harris, a Tim Hardaway Jr., he's been given that spacing and it really allows him the space to kind of pick apart a defense. And he's done great at that. So he's kind of, the Pistons since Jaden Ivey went out are like a 17th ranked offensive rating in the NBA. They really should be like much lower, but Cade's kind of making them a passable offense. So, and along with that, their defense has been great, but Cade's kind of carrying them to being an NBA offense, and it's because he just simply has some spacing. He's doing what he has to do to create open looks for himself and others. The other area is that his pull-up three-point shooting. That was something he had at Oklahoma State, and that was one of the biggest things about him. He didn't have it the first few years of his career. It was something I know that he's been working on, wanting to bring to the NBA level. I've talked with his trainer. I've talked with his brother. It's something they worked a lot on this offseason, and it's full on here. He's hitting step-back threes. You go under the screen, you go over a screen, don't recover fast enough. He's pulling it up. He's traded a lot of those long twos that he took previously into pull-up threes, which is big for his development. So along with that, I think he's just each year of Cade's career, as the season goes on, he gets better. It seems like he's problem-solving in real time. Like you're seeing him score in ways now they just didn't even try to before. Like instead of going all the way to the basket and forcing a tough attempt, he's really trying to utilize that 4 to 7 foot area, whether it's a sweeping hook, whether it's a floater. He's realizing that he has that wingspan, that size, where if he just gets to a spot, he can just elevate over someone and just floater it in, which he's been really good at recently as well. So he's really trying to become that legit 3-level scorer. And to tip it off, he's showing up in the biggest moments for them as of late. Like when they need him, even when he's struggling throughout a game, when they need him to turn it on, he turns it on. Against Houston, close game, scores 19 in the third quarter. New York, they're not getting anything going. He's struggling. In the second half, he just goes berserk and outplays Jalen Brunson and wins the game. Even yesterday's game against the Orlando Magic, he struggled the whole night. Looks like Orlando's about to get away with this. And then in the fourth quarter, he just goes crazy and kind of makes it a game. They still lose, but it's those kind of things where Cade's kind of like just showing up in these specific moments, especially this month. Even in games he's struggling, he's finding moments to really put his presence on the court and get the Pistons some wins. So I think he's clearly an all-star, like you said. Oh, I apologize for that. That's my alarm to wake up. but yeah, Cade's look great. Cade's look great. I'm also a late, or I guess a long sleeper. So sorry about that.
You and I are both. This is a little bit of an early morning for both of us because both of the teams we covered played last night. But one of the things that you mentioned there that stuck out to me is the problem solving in real time in terms of how he is improving his game. So I am curious because he's improved in a lot of areas, as you mentioned, but what's next for him? Like, where do you see, whether it's between now and the end of this season or maybe after next summer, what he looks like next season? But what do you think is the next area of potential growth for Cade?
So by the end of this season, I think the main thing for him is to try to cut down on these turnovers. The high usage players in the NBA, they all turn the ball over a lot. You look at the top leaders of turnovers, it's all the best players. They're all going to turn the ball over. I mean, that's what happens. But Cade, I've said on the podcast myself that like if he's around 3 to 4, you'll live with it because that's, it is what it is. Once you start getting to that 6, 7, 8, and really last week he had 2 10+ turnover games. And they won both those games. But he looked great. That's one of the other things too, is that he turned the ball over a ton, but 2 of those games, that was against Houston. I believe the other one was against New York, and he looked like the best player on the court, both those ones. So, but I mean, either way, you want him to, you can't be giving up that many possessions. You need to be more careful with the ball and allow your team to have those possessions instead of giving the other team possession. So I think this year, by the end of the year, that's the area where you'd like to see him just get better at and just not turn the ball over as much and be careful with the ball. As far as long-term, I've said it for a while, it's his finishing around the rim. And whether that's turning the finishing around the rim or his attempts at the rim into free throw attempts, or like he's done as of late, kind of shortening up his drives and stopping a little shorter from the rim and turning it into floaters, he needs to become more efficient in that area. You look at his splits and you sit there and you wonder, how is he not like well above a league true shooting percentage? And it's because his finishing around the rim, like he's a fine 3-point shooter. He's taking a lot of threes. He's making a lot of threes. He's making a decent amount of twos. He's making a good amount of his free throws, but his finishing around the rim just isn't there right now. It's not where you'd like it to be, I would say. So he needs to either turn those into free throw attempts, which I know he's been trying, just he hasn't been getting much, I would say, a very great whistle with that, or simply turn some of those looks that are tough looks into, floaters or runners, etc. So where your finishing around the rim gets a little better. But that's the long-term development. Just this year, he needs to shorten up the turnovers a lot.
So the other guy with the Pistons, of course, who that I need to ask about is head coach JB Bickerstaff. Of course, former Cavs head coach, was relieved of his duties following the playoffs last year, has done a fantastic job with the Pistons. What do you like about what you've seen from this team under Bickerstaff's leadership on the sidelines?
So last night he got ejected for the first time, but like
Right.
all year it feels like he's been asking to get ejected. He'd be riding the officials, dude. Like
Every Cavs fan that is listening to this right now it's that Leonardo DiCaprio meme. Just like I know what you're talking about. That I've been there before. That is every single Cavs fan listening to this right now.
Yeah, I mean he's been riding them all year, and I think the players like the fact that he fights for them, and he's going to hold it down for them. So, but he did get ejected last night against Orlando. The refs on both ways, it was pretty bad. I mean, Paolo was allowed to double dribble, and then Ron Holland double dribble. They didn't call either. It was just like, what's going on? But but yeah, JB, I think he's been even better than I could have expected. I mean, we've had you on the podcast before the season started to talk about, what to expect from JB. And some of the things that you read about JB before the season was, maybe some of his offensive creativity isn't the greatest or, some stuff like that. But to be honest, I think he's done close to like an A+ job with the Pistons this year. I don't really have much to complain about with him at all. I think he's been, first of all, what he's getting out of them defensively has been otherworldly. I don't know how he's done it. Getting Asar Thompson back surely changed a lot of it. But I mean, he's been doing good stuff with them defensively. He's adjusting throughout the season. At the beginning of the year, they were more in some drop coverage, a lot of conservative play. This month, they've been a lot more aggressive, blitzing at the level, high on the screen. Like they've been a little bit more aggressive, so he's adjusted as the seasons went on. And then offensively, I don't think it's not like he's doing like some shocking, next level stuff, but he's keeping it simple, but in a way that it's fine, like it's working. When you have Cade, just give him some spacers, and you put him in positions where Cade's going to be at advantages, and then Cade will have, will orchestrate it from there. You give Cade an advantage, put him in the right spots, and then he'll make things happen. So he's done that. I like his rotations as well. I think the only area that I think Pistons fans may not like that he's been doing is that his rotation throughout the year consistently has Cade getting a break midway through the fourth quarter. And a lot of Pistons fans feel like, he's leaving the game for that 2-minute stretch and real important minutes of the game. You're kind of giving up minutes. But, even that he's adjusted somewhat as of late. Like last night, Cade has been playing a lot of the fourth quarter. He gets his break a little earlier in the fourth. He starts the fourth now, and he comes back a little earlier. So I really like the fact that we've seen from JB, I guess, to wrap it up, is that he doesn't seem like he's just stuck to one thing. And that's something I really like. He's adjusted throughout the year, whether it's, playing a certain guy this many minutes or changing his rotation for that or changing his defense. Like he's adjusted well. We'll see how it looks like a few years down the line. Obviously, when the Pistons are, at the spot the Cavs were last year, maybe then it becomes an issue or something. But he's been spectacular this year. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else any Pistons fan could have expected out of him this year.
Yeah, I mean, going from what the Pistons were last year to what they've been so far this year, as they currently sit 6th place in the East as they enter a game with the Cavs on Monday. It'll be very interesting to see what that reunion looks like on Monday night in Cleveland. Ku, thanks so much for doing this, man. Very much appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. That's rocketrx.com. It only takes 2 minutes, and right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions do apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. And of course, Wes Goldberg does a great job covering the Miami Heat over at Locked On Heat. And he's had a lot to cover this year because the Heat while they have not necessarily been the best product on the floor, it's hard to find a more dramatic team off the floor because Jimmy Butler still exists, still on the Heat, coming off of a suspension potentially today. We don't know if he's going to play or not, but the 2-game suspension, his second of the year, has expired. Wes, why is Jimmy Butler still on this team?
Because they can't find a trade that they like. And until they do, I think that you're just going to see them kind of play it like this. They're going to try to find reasons to suspend him. It wouldn't shock me if this wasn't his last suspension, right, with the Heat. But in the meantime, during these home games, they're going to have to deal with it. And Jimmy Butler, as we know, there's a lot of twists and turns in the Jimmy Butler saga. The Heat have to deal with all those things. But the reason, to answer your question, like, this is a team that is, I think, very motivated to trade Jimmy Butler, but they're also making it very known that they're not going to settle. And they are trying to create as much leverage as they can in a situation where, quite frankly, neither side has much leverage between Jimmy Butler or the Miami Heat. And so I think you're going to see this probably go down all the way to the wire here of the trade deadline. And there's a chance that he's still on the team after the trade deadline, but the Heat aren't going to rush into it, I don't think. As motivated as they might be, they're going to try to get the best deal possible.
What do you think they want in terms of, like, what is that ideal best deal for the Miami Heat? And what do you personally think that Jimmy's worth on the trade market?
So the Heat, more than anything, they want to maintain their flexibility, right? They have an eye on the offseason of 2026 when Luka Doncic, De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Durant, Trae Young, Jaren Jackson Jr., like, there's just a bunch of names that could potentially be out there. Now, of course, all those players could sign extensions before that, but Miami wants to at least keep that an option for now. If Jimmy Butler's not going to be on the team, they know that they need to find a path forward in terms of getting their next superstar. And I guess to answer your second part of that question is, Jimmy Butler is not worth a superstar return anymore, right? When you trade your star player in the NBA, you want one of two things. You either want a star back or a lottery ticket that can potentially get you that next star. Maybe that lottery ticket is a blue chip young prospect, on a rookie contract. Maybe that lottery ticket is a draft pick that's unprotected or something like that. The Heat aren't going to get any of that, right? There is no Shai Gilgeous-Alexander coming over from the Clippers, right? When the Thunder traded Paul George, like, there is no, that 2031 pick got moved from Phoenix to Utah, and that's not going to be part of this deal either. So, I think in terms of Jimmy Butler's value here, it's minimal. And for a team that wants that last piece to kind of get them into the mix here, kind of take a leap in the standings or go up a tier, I think he makes some sense. He makes some sense as a rental. But if Jimmy Butler thinks that max contract is going, like a long-term max contract, is going to be out there, I don't know that that's going to be out there from any team that's not Phoenix. And that's sort of the reality that Jimmy Butler has to face, but also the reality that the Miami Heat have to face while they're sort of shopping him around. Because I don't think that the market is what it could have been even 6 months ago had they actually seriously considered trading him in the offseason, when I think they probably should have.
As for the Heat on the floor, they're in 8th place in the Eastern Conference right now. As we record this, they're 22-22. They will play again before they see the Cavs on Wednesday night in Miami. But part of the reason why they're in 8th is, one, I don't think Bam Adebayo has been very good, and two, Tyler Hero has been very good. I want to start with Tyler first, but what has allowed him to kind of take this next step in his game so far this year?
He's cleaned up his shot chart. I mean, he's taken that mid-range stuff out of his game. He had a tendency to over-dribble into these long two-pointers, and it got him into a lot of trouble. And it kind of stopped the offense, took him out of the flow. And this year, he said, he looked at Steph Curry's shot chart and he said, I'm going to try to do that. And for the most part, he has. It's been pretty remarkable to see this 180 that he's kind of taken here in terms of his approach. Never had a better season in terms of three-point shooting. Like, the volume hadn't been there, but the efficiency was always there. Like, you look at his catch and shoot numbers, they're right there with Steph and Clay and some of these elite three-point shooters over the last few years, but the volume just wasn't there. And I think the big question that Miami always had with Tyler Hero was, well, what would happen if we scaled that up to Steph Curry, Klay Thompson types of levels? And they got the answer. They said, yep, the efficiency could stay there. In fact, it actually gets even a little bit better, and we're getting the volume there. So that's why you've seen that from Tyler, is he's just picking the right shots now.
So this year, Bam's counting stats, I think, look okay. They're kind of on par with his career averages. But what have you seen from him on the floor?
Sort of the opposite of Tyler. I think he's having a hard time finding his spot in this offense. Miami, not only did they ask Tyler Hero to take more threes, they want the offense to take a lot more threes, right? This is a team that wants to play a little bit more 5-out, get that volume up. And Bam Adebayo is not a three-point shooter. He's dabbled with it a little bit here and there, but he's not a known three-point shooter. And I think he's had a hard time. Like this is a guy who also, like Tyler Hero and Jimmy Butler the last few years, his shot diet consisted mostly of those like kind of 15-foot free throw line jumpers. And that's where his sweet spot was. And the Heat really were trying to work that mid-range stuff out of their game. They were upside down on the math. There was no way after 2 years of being bottom 10 in offensive rating that they were going to be a good offense if they were taking this many mid-range shots. You know, we know that the math just doesn't work anymore for that. And so I think Bam's just had a hard time finding a new sweet spot because he doesn't have one. And over the last couple of weeks, I think that they've said, you know what, we got to get this guy going. They've sort of given him a little bit more freedom to take those shots, but it just feels like the whole season kind of got out of whack for him. And he just never was really able to find his rhythm, and he's still struggling to do it.
So from afar, the funnest part of the Miami season so far to me has been what Kevin Love has been posting on Instagram. What have your thoughts been on his off the court antics that we've seen?
Yeah, I think it's appreciated, right? Like everybody needs like a little bit of comedic relief amidst the Jimmy Butler drama. And for the right, like Kevin Love is the one guy who I think I shouldn't say the one guy. Kevin Love has made more effort than maybe any other person in that locker room to reach out to Jimmy in this time. Well, even after Jimmy requested the trade and has sort of kind of blown up that locker room to a degree and burned a lot of bridges within that organization, obviously, Kevin Love is the one that has just been trying to kind of keep the parents together, right? And so that I think that's sort of the comedic relief is what he's doing on social media and stuff like that. And he is picking and choosing and editing and posting those clips on his own. So he's doing it too. So he's got pretty good social media chops as well.
It hasn't been bad. It's been entertaining. Certainly, I think it's fair to say. So as I mentioned, Heat are in 8th place entering play on Monday. Where's your best guess as to where, when the season finishes on April 13th, where do you think Miami will be in the standings?
Yeah, it's a great question. They've been in the play-in tournament 2 years in a row now, and it feels like that's where we're going, right? Like the Magic are getting their guys back now, and they haven't fallen too much in the standings. And I think that was something that the Heat were obviously, counting on was, hey, maybe these teams, Indiana, Orlando, maybe they slip a little bit, and that opens things up for us. Those teams are just better. And with or without Jimmy Butler, I do think that if this team can get like a role player or two back in a Jimmy Butler trade who can help right now, there's a world where they maybe make a run after all the Jimmy Butler stuff is cleared, right? And you can kind of see the locker room kind of come back together, and maybe this team can go on a little bit of a stretch here. But I think we're looking at another play-in year for the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I think that is what all signs point to. And if you want to learn more about Miami, or if you just want to keep up with the Jimmy Butler drama, Locked On Heat is the place to go. Wes, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, man.
Thanks for having me.
And coming back onto the podcast, Brad Rowland, Locked On Hawks, does a great job down there. And the Hawks are a team that not playing necessarily their best basketball right now, losers of 4 straight as we record this on Sunday morning, Brad. But they are a team that, for whatever reason, has had success against the Cavs. They're 2-0 against Cleveland in the 2 games they've played so far, and they will catch the Cavs on the second night of a back-to-back on Thursday this week. But Brad, what is going on with the Hawks lately? They are, as I mentioned, losers of their last 4. They're 4-6 in their last 10. They're below 500 for the first time since just before Christmas. What have been the issues lately with the Hawks?
Yeah, I mean, not to start in a place of it sounds like I'm making an excuse that I'm not, but they're extremely banged up right now. They've been missing their top 2 forwards for the last couple of games. Jalen Johnson's been out for a little while now. He has a shoulder injury that they're worried about as we're talking right now. I don't have details at the moment, but he's been out. And also beyond that, the offense is just kind of cratered. They've been they're back into the bottom 10 for the season in offense, which is not what the Hawks have been in recent years, but they've been unable to score. I mean, as we're talking on Sunday, they had this game on Saturday that was probably their worst offensive game of the season, and it came at home against the Raptors, which is a tough scene, basically, I would say. So that's where I would circle. They've been unable to score, and it's kind of been revelatory in that this is still a team that's like, decent, but they're also a little bit ahead of schedule this year, and I think very thin. They can't really afford injuries to a couple guys on this roster. I'm sure we'll talk about. Trae Young is one of them, but Jalen Johnson, DeAndre Hunter are the other ones, and a couple of those guys have been out at bad times recently.
Right. So Jalen Johnson, obviously out right now, shoulder injury, big deal for the Hawks because you mentioned the depth is thin. But what do they miss when he's not on the floor? Because he's somebody that I look at the season that he's had. I don't know that he'll be an all-star, but I think he belongs in like that conversation as far as maybe one of those wild card spots at the bottom of the Eastern Conference all-star team. But what are they missing without him?
Yeah, first of all, I'm with you on the All-Star thing. I'm not sure if I would pick him, but he'd be right there on the edge of things. He is just, even in the raw box score numbers, which I don't always love box score numbers compared to everybody else, but he's averaging 19, 10, and 5. And like, you can't necessarily fake that. Like, that's pretty good on solid efficiency. But when he's not there, when he's not there, though, the big thing for me is not even this. I mean, his offense is really important too, especially in transition. He's really their engine for when they're able to run. He's really a weapon there. But for me, it's the little things with Jalen. Like, he's not a great defender yet, but he is a very helpful defender, secondary rim protector. And for me, he's a very, very good rebounder at the 4. Like, not necessarily what you would bank on, but 10 rebounds a game speaks for itself. But he's also able to secure stuff, especially when he plays with Onyeka Okongwu, who's a little bit smaller at the 5. He opens up a lot of things for them. And the big thing is they have no replacement for him. He's the only guy on the roster that's anything like how he is. Their backup power forward is DeAndre Hunter a lot of the time, who's a good player, but very different. Doesn't do any of the defensive stuff, doesn't do any of the rebounding stuff that Johnson does. He's kind of their one and only guy that checks a lot of those boxes in running in transition, rebounding, secondary protection. And even this season, their on-off splits are they're still like plus 13. Well, they're 13 points better per 100 when he plays. They're basically pretty good when he plays, and they're terrible when he does it. And I think it actually makes sense if you actually watch them.
So the other thing that you did mention in your first answer was that the offense has slipped. And that is something that when people see this roster and recognize that it is thin and recognize that there are a couple of key factors that are not currently playing, but you also see Trae Young, who is somebody that I think is one of the best creators in basketball. He's the league leader in assists per game. I mean, by a wide margin too, but he's not necessarily shooting the ball all that well this year. Is that what you think is the biggest issue with them offensively as to why they rank where they rank, or is it something else that's going on?
I think it would certainly help if he was shooting his career norms. Like, he's always been a guy that's been more about overall efficiency than like field goal percentage, for instance. Like, he's one of the prime examples of a guy that I think field goal percentage is probably misleading. He takes a lot of threes, gets to the line a ton, makes a lot of free throws. So he's always been more efficient than people want to think that he is. But this year it's been not very good. And I think the big thing with his individual efficiency is that he can't find his floater this season. It's always been a huge weapon for him. And it kind of has to be when you're 6'1" and you're playing in the trees inside the lane. And he's not been able to make that shot at his normal level, which has been a big factor. I think he's a part of the offensive decline, but like you said, he's still a wizard passer. I think he remains underrated as a playmaker, which sounds funny for someone who's leading the league in assists, but people casually are like, well, Trae Young's a scorer. I'm like, no, Trae Young is really a playmaker first. Like, he can score too, but that's part of it. Also, I think just the personnel is not particularly good offensively on this roster. I mean, he makes a lot of it work, but they don't have a lot of shooting. They're taking more threes now. They have a more, I would say, modern offensive approach now with Quinn Snyder than they have under Nate McMillan in previous years, et cetera. But they don't have a lot of sharpshooters. And the guys they do have are not having great seasons. I won't go down the rabbit hole on Bogdanovich or Garrison Matthews or whatever, but they don't have a lot of spacing on the floor. And when you're Trae Young and you're 6'1", there are limitations there to where if you're not operating with real space, it's going to hurt the rest of the offense. He's a guy that you can contain if there's not a lot of space around him because he is so small. You can throw size at him, all that stuff. So that's probably the long and short of it. Is they don't have a lot of talent, a lot of spacing, and then Trae's not shooting the ball well. But also, this is a defensive first personnel team, which sounds crazy. I've covered this team for a long time, and it's been a while since they actually have better defensive personnel and offensive personnel, but they kind of do despite having Trae Young.
Well, how hard is it to be a defensive first team when you have Trae Young? And I don't think Trae is. I think he has probably improved a little bit as a defender because I do think there was a time in his career where you could make the case he was the worst defensive player in the NBA. And I'm not sure that's true anymore, but how hard is it to be a defense first team with him having to defend at times at the point of attack?
Yeah, it is hard. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, he has improved. I think the caricature of Trae Young defensively is not particularly accurate in the fact that, like, he is bad. Don't get me wrong. He's not going to ever be a good defender, but he does give more effort than he used to. He is better executing the scheme than he used to be. He's just run of the mill bad now. Like, he's typical small point guard bad now versus what he maybe was a few years ago. And also, I love them. I don't know about you. I think point guard defense is like, it matters, but most guys at point guard are not very good defensively. So like there's a limit to how damaging you can be as a point guard defender. Like if you have a bad center defender, it's much more damaging than if you have a bad point guard defender. And that's long story long there. But I do think that it's hard. The Hawks have done this thing, I think, smartly this year in particular, and they've always kind of tried to do this, but they're building around him with a bunch of guys who are long, athletic defenders. And that's proven to be a successful method on that end of the floor. Like they're league average this year defensively, which may not sound like much, but they've been in the bottom 7 or 8 for like 4 or 5 years in a row coming in. Dyson Daniels has been the biggest part of that. He's been awesome this year. But, Reece Shea, the number 1 overall pick, not having a great offensive season by any means, but he's already a pretty solid defender, 6'9", real length, Jalen Johnson, etc. So they can do it. What you want to avoid with Trae Young, and it is a limitation of your team building, is to not have anybody else on the team or anybody else on the floor with him that's a bad defender, like a really actively bad defender. That's when you get into weird spots. You can have one, especially if it's a guard. You can have one shaky bad defender. If you have 2, it gets hard. If you get 3, you're kind of drawing dead. That's my shorthand for this. So they've done a good job around him. But yeah, I think I don't want to say impossible. It's very difficult to build a good capital G defense with Trae Young at point guard. I think you could probably be a top 10 unit if you were great everywhere else. You probably can't be a top 3 unit with him on the floor.
I think that's totally fair, and I think that's a good way of explaining it, because when you do have limitations out on the perimeter, which a lot of teams do, it makes it more important what you have elsewhere. I did want to ask about Reece Shea, because we don't necessarily, because the Hawks have been a good team in recent years and they've not gone into, some full-blown tank and they ended up with a number 1 overall pick. I think it feels a little bit weird, but what have you seen from him in terms of the progress he's made from the time he was drafted to what he looks like now at the end of January?
Yeah, I think he's having a season that I kind of expected him to have. And maybe it's that I'm like very pragmatic about rookies. I have a line that I say on my podcast that rookies are bad with very few exceptions, because they are. Rookies, especially one and done, like 19-year-old rookies. Unless you're an outlier, you're probably going to be bad as a rookie. And this year's class, as I'm sure you've discussed many times, was not supposed to be good. It isn't good. The top of the draft, it was the wrong year to win the lottery. And I say that while liking Zachary Shea. Like the Hawks got lucky for the first time in their franchise history and won the lottery, and their prize was a draft where there was no number 1 pick, to be honest. If you keep that context important, like he is not that typical number 1 overall pick. He's just not. But he's really, I think, played in a pretty mature way. Like it's also a weird situation where he's not coming into a bad team. Like they're trying to win now. They don't have their pick this year. They're not all in, but they're not rebuilding, like you said. Like he's fit in immediately as a role player in a way that most rookies like that don't really fit. And I think defensively, he's done a really good job. He's moved the ball well. The ball just hasn't gone in for him as a shooter. I think he's like 49% true shooting, which is obviously quite bad. And I think that long-term, the hope for him would be he makes shots, because that was part of the package with him. It's like, all right, he'll be at least a pretty good 3-point shooter, if not better. He hasn't been that yet. But I think if you look beyond that a step or two, he's been fine. I think it helps him a little bit perception-wise that there really is no rookie this year that's lighting the world on fire. Alex Starr's been a little bit probably better than him recently. But he famously didn't want to come to Atlanta, which was that kind of got leaked out there. He didn't want to come to Atlanta, so that takes the heat up a little bit. Reed Shepherd's not really doing anything in Houston, so I'll stop doing the whole list. But there wasn't a guy for the Hawks to take that's like blowing them away somewhere else, so that the spotlight's a little bit off of him. But I think in general, he's done a pretty good job, like being a functional part of a pretty good team.
So as things stand right now, and I'll get you out of here with this, but the Hawks are 22-23. They're 9th in the East. They are at the bottom of what is a 4-team bunch right now. You've got Detroit, who Atlanta is a game behind, and Orlando, they're a game behind. Miami, they're a half game behind. Is this just kind of who you think this team is? And where do you think ultimately, when the season ends on, I believe, April 13th is the final day of the regular season, where do you think the Hawks will be in the Eastern Conference standings?
Yeah, I think this is about where I would have projected preseason. People kind of forgotten this, at least locally. Like this was like a team that won in the mid-30s in terms of the over-unders coming into the year. So they're actually ahead of their pace, even with this recent 4-game swoon, which is, of course, hurt the vibes, as you might imagine, locally. But yeah, I think that they'll be right around here. A lot of it might depend on Jalen Johnson. Like, as we're talking, we don't know. But if that's a serious injury, they're kind of still evaluating his shoulder. If he's out for a while, it's going to be bad news for them. They can't really withstand his absence for too long. But provided that's not like a season ender or something like that, yeah, they'll probably be in the play-in realistically, which is kind of where I had them before the season started. So it's kind of, other than Detroit, no one that's ahead of them right now was not supposed to be ahead of them coming into the season. So it's kind of like what I expected. I was a little bit higher on them than some, but yeah, something like 40 to 41, 42 wins and a 8-9 play-in spot would be where I would project right now, pending Jalen Johnson. If he's out for a while, I would lower that to mid to high 30s projection. Probably still in that 9-10 mix, considering how bad the East is at times. But I think
they're not in danger of falling to 11th. There's no chance of that.
I mean, probably not unless Philadelphia really goes crazy in the way they have it this year. That'd be the only way that they would be a little. The only team behind them that I'd be afraid of if I was the Hawks is Philly, and sure. But that's also assuming Embiid is alive. So we don't really know what's going on there. Anyway, yeah, I would say still the floor is probably the 10 seed, and the ceiling now is a little bit lower than it might have been a week ago. I think they probably still could realistically get the 6 seed if things went beautifully, but somewhere in the play-in mix probably.
Well, Brad Rowland does a great job covering the Atlanta Hawks. Check out his podcast, Locked On Hawks, every day if you're looking for more info on that before the Cavs take on the Hawks on the second night of back-to-back for Cleveland after they play in Miami the night before. So that'll be a tough one for the Cavs, but we'll see if they can finally find a way to beat Atlanta this year. Brad, thanks so much for the time, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor before we get out of here. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Thank you to Ku Khahil. Thank you to Wes Goldberg. Thank you to Brad Rowland. All three of them were terrific on this whip around edition of Locked On Cavs. Cavs take on the Pistons tonight if you're watching and listening to this on Monday. So I will be back tomorrow talking about what happens in that game right here on Locked On Cavs.